Welcome to CNN's Republican presidential debate. No topic perhaps has been more combustible in this campaign than the issue of immigration. Mr. Trump, you have called for deporting every undocumented immigrant. Governor Christie has said, quote, "There are not enough law enforcement officers, local, county, state, and federal combined, to forcibly deport 11 to 12 million people." Tell Governor Christie how much your plan will cost and how you will get it done.
Correct. First of all, I want to build a wall that works. So important, and it's a big part of it. Second of all, we have a lot of really bad dudes in this country from outside, and I think Chris knows that maybe as well as anybody. They go, if I get elected, first day, they're gone. Gangs all over the place, Chicago, Baltimore, no matter where you look. We have a country based on laws. I will make sure that those laws are adhered to. These are illegal immigrants. I don't think you'd even be asking this question if I didn't run. Because when I ran, and I brought this up at my opening remarks at Trump Tower, I took heat like nobody has taken heat in a long time. And then they found out with the killing of Kate from San Francisco and so many other crimes, they found out that I was right. And most people, many people, apologized to me. I don't think you'd even be talking about illegal immigration if it weren't for me. So, we have a country of laws. They're going to go out, and they'll come back if they deserve to come back. If they've had a bad record, if they've been arrested, if they've been in jail, they're never coming back. We're going to have a country again. Right now, we don't have a country, we don't have a border, and we're going to do something about it. And it can be done with proper management, and it can be done with heart.
Governor Christie, you and I have talked about this in an interview. You say that his big wall, his plan to deport 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants, it sounds great, but it's never going to happen. Tell him why you're skeptical of his plans.
Well, first off, Jake, I don't yield to anybody on how to enforce the law. I'm the only person on the stage who spent 7 years as the United States Attorney after September 11th. And I know how to do this. The fact is, though, that for 15,000 people a day to be deported every day for 2 years is an undertaking that almost none of us could accomplish given the current levels of funding and the current number of law enforcement officers. But here's what we need to do, and I think this is where Donald is absolutely right. What we need to do is to secure our border, and we need to do it with more than just a wall. We need to use electronics, we need to use drones, we need to use FBI, DA, and ATF, and yes, we need to take the fingerprint of every person who comes into this country on a visa, and when they overstay their visa, we need to tap them on the shoulder and say, you have overstayed your welcome, you are taking advantage of the American people, it's time for you to go. If we had that kind of system in place, we wouldn't have the 11 million people we have now.
Thank you, Governor Christie.
By the way, I agree with what Chris is saying, but I will say this. Illegal immigration is costing us more than $200 billion a year, just maintaining what we have.
I want to bring in Dr. Carson because he, too, has been skeptical of your plan to immediately deport 11 to 12 million illegal immigrants. He said, quote, "People who say that have no idea what this entails." Why do you say that, Dr. Carson?
Well, first of all, recognize that we have an incredible illegal immigration problem. I was down in Arizona a few weeks ago at the border. I mean, the fences that were there were not manned, and those are the kind of fences when I was a kid that would barely slow us down. So I don't see any purpose in having that. Now, what we need to do is look at something that actually works. Yuma County, Arizona, they stopped 97% of the illegal immigration through there. They put in a double fence with a road so that there was quick access by the enforcement people. If we don't seal the border, the rest of the stuff really doesn't matter. It's kind of ridiculous, all the other things that we talk about. We have the ability to do it. We don't have the will to do it. There was one area where they had cut a hole in the fence, and to prepare it, they put a few strands of barbed wire across. Well, the photographers who were there with us, they wanted to photograph us from the side of the Mexicans, and they went through there, and they were not physically fit people, and they took their cameras and things with them and shot us from the other side. That's how easy it is to get across. And the drugs, I mean, it goes on and on and on. ICE tells them to release these people. 67,000 criminals released onto our property. It's ridiculous.
With all due respect, Dr. Carson, you said about Donald Trump's plan to immediately deport 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants. People who say that have no idea what this entails. Why not?
Well, I have also said if anybody knows how to do that, that I would be willing to listen. And if they can, specify exactly how that's going to be done and what the costs, and it sounds reasonable, then I think it's worth discussing. But
let's continue the conversation about illegal immigration with Dana Bash.
Governor Bush, Mr. Trump has suggested that your views on immigration are influenced by your Mexican-born wife. He said that, quote, if my wife were from Mexico, I think I would have a soft spot for people from Mexico. Did Mr. Trump go too far in invoking your wife?
He did. He did. You're proud of your family, just as I am. Correct. To subject my wife into the middle of a raucous political conversation was completely inappropriate, and I hope you apologize for that, Donald.
Well, I have to tell you, I hear phenomenal things. I hear your wife is a lovely woman.
She is. She's
fantastic.
Know her,
and this
she
is
absolutely the love of my life, and she's right here. And why don't you apologize for her?
No, I won't
right
do that
now.
because I said nothing wrong, but I do hear she's a lovely woman.
So here's the deal. My wife is a Mexican-American. She's an American by choice. She loves this country as much as anybody in this room. And she wants a secure border, but she wants to embrace the traditional American values that make us special and make us unique. We're at a crossroads right now. Are we going to take the Reagan approach, the hopeful, optimistic approach, the approach that says that you come to our country legally, you pursue your dreams with a vengeance, you create opportunities for all of us, or the Donald Trump approach? The approach that says that everything is bad, that everything's coming to an end. I'm on the Reagan side of this.
That they come into our country as an act of love. With all of the problems that we have in so many instances, we have wonderful people coming in. But with all of the problems, this is not an act of love. He's weak on immigration, by the way, in favor of Common Core, which is also a disaster. But weak on immigration, he doesn't get my vote.
Mr. Trump, immigration did not come up in 2016 because Mr. Trump brought it up. We talked about it in 2012. We talked about it in 2008. We talked about it in 2004. We have been talking about it for 25 years. This is why people are tired of politicians.
We're going to come to you. I just want to get Governor Bush a chance to respond to what Mr. Trump said.
Look, first of all, I wrote a book about this 4 years ago now. And I laid out a comprehensive conservative approach for immigration reform. And it does require securing the border. No one disagrees with that. But to build a wall and to deport people 500,000 a month would cost hundreds of billions of dollars, Donald. Hundreds of billions of dollars. It would destroy community life. It would tear families apart. And it would send us to the rest of the world that the United States values that are so important for our long-term success no longer matter in this country.
As I said, we are spending $200 billion. We are spending $200 billion a year on maintaining what we have. We will move them out. The great ones will come back. The good ones will come back. They'll be expedited. They'll be back. They'll come back legally. We'll have a country. They'll come back legally.
Okay, on that note, you have criticized Governor Bush for speaking Spanish on the campaign trail. You said, quote, he should really set an example by speaking English in the United States. What's wrong with speaking Spanish?
Well, I think it's wonderful and all, but I did it a little bit half-heartedly, but I do mean it to a large extent. We have a country where to assimilate, you have to speak English. And I think that where he was and the way it came out didn't sound right to me. We have to have assimilation. To have a country, we have to have assimilation. I'm not the first one to say this, Dana. We've had many people over the years, for many, many years, saying the same thing. This is a country where we speak English, not Spanish.
Well, I've been speaking English here tonight, and I'll keep speaking English, but the simple fact is if a high school kid asked me a question in Spanish, a school, by the way, a voucher program that was created under my watch, the largest voucher program in the country, where kids can go to a Christian school, and they ask me a question in Spanish, I'm going to show respect and answer that question in Spanish, even though they do speak English, and even though they embrace American values.
This was a reporter, not a high school kid, by the way.
Dana, I agree that English is the unifying language of our country, and everyone should learn to speak it. It's important. I want to tell you a story about someone that didn't speak English that well. It was my grandfather. He came to this country in the 1960s as escaping Cuba, and he lived with us growing up. And my grandfather loved America. He understood what was so special about this country. He loved Ronald Reagan. He would be very proud of the fact that we're here this evening. My grandfather instilled in me the belief that I was blessed to live in the one society in all of human history where even I, the son of a bartender and a maid, could aspire to have anything and be anything that I was willing to work hard to achieve. But he taught me that in Spanish, because it was the language he was most comfortable in. And he became a conservative, even though he got his news in Spanish. And so I do give interviews in Spanish, and here's why. Because I believe that free enterprise and limited government is the best way to help people who are trying to achieve upward mobility. And if they get their news in Spanish, I want them to hear that directly from me, not from a translator at Univision.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Senator Cruz. Senator Cruz. This week, we learned more about Dr. Carson's plan for the 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants in this country. Dr. Carson proposed giving these undocumented immigrants a 6-month grace period to pay back taxes, then to let them become guest workers, and only to deport people who fail to do that.
Not exactly what I said.
Well, how would you say it, sir? I was just reading the Wall Street Journal quote, but please tell us.
Well, what I said, after we seal the borders, after we turn off the spigot that dispenses all the goodies, so we don't have people coming in here, including employment, that people who had a pristine record, we should consider allowing them to become guest workers primarily in the agricultural sphere, because that's the place where Americans don't seem to want to work. That's what I said. And they have a 6-month period to do that. If they don't do it within that time period, then they become illegal. And as illegals, they will be treated as such.
Okay, from the horse's mouth. Senator Cruz, does that fit your definition of amnesty?
Well, Jake, you know, I'm very glad that Donald Trump's being in this race has forced the mainstream media finally to talk about illegal immigration. I think that's very important. I like and respect Ben Carson. I'll let him talk about his own plans. But I will say this, the natural next question that primary voters are asking after we focus on illegal immigration is, okay, what are the records of the various candidates? And this is an issue on which there are stark differences. A majority of the men and women on this stage have previously and publicly embraced amnesty. I am the only candidate on this stage who has never supported amnesty, and in fact, who helped lead the fight to stop a massive amnesty plan in 2013 when Barack Obama and Harry Reid joined the Washington Republicans in a massive amnesty plan. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Jeff Sessions helping lead the fight. You know, folks here have talked about how do you secure the borders. Well, I've been leading the fight in the Senate to triple the Border Patrol, to put in place fencings and walls, to put in place a strong biometric exit-entry system.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rubio, I'm not sure exactly. We'll come back to you in 1 second, sir. Yeah. But Senator Rubio, I'm not sure exactly whose plan he's saying as constitutes amnesty, but I know he has said it about your plan in the past, so I want to give you a chance to respond. Then Dr. Carson will come to you.
Okay. Well, let me say that legal immigration is not an issue I read about in the newspaper. Immigration, illegal immigration, all the good aspects of immigration, and all the negative ones as well, I live with. My family's immigrants. My neighbors are all immigrants. My in-laws are all immigrants. So I've seen every aspect of it. And I can tell you America doesn't have one immigration problem. It has 3. First, despite the fact that we are the most generous country in the history of the world on allowing people to come here legally, we have people still coming illegally. Second, we have a legal immigration system that no longer works. It primarily is built on the basis of whether or not you have a relative living here instead of merit. And third, we have 11 or 12 million people, many of whom have been here for longer than a decade, who are already here illegally. And we must deal with all 3 of these problems. We cannot deal with all 3 of these problems in one massive piece of legislation. I learned that. We tried it that way. Here's the way forward. First, we must secure our border, the physical border with a wall, absolutely, but we also need to have an entry-exit tracking system. 40% of the people who come here illegally come illegally, and then they overstay the visa. We also need a mandatory e-verify system. After we've done that, step 2 would be to modernize our legal immigration system. So you come to America on the basis of what you can contribute economically, not whether or not simply you have a relative living here. And after we've done those 2 things, I believe the American people will be very reasonable and responsible about what you do with someone who's been here and isn't a criminal. If you're a criminal, obviously you will not be able to stay.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Carson, I want to give you 30 seconds. I'd like you to answer the question. Senator Cruz describes plans such as yours as amnesty. Why is your plan not amnesty?
My plan is not amnesty for a number of reasons. Number one, you know, I've talked to farmers, and they said they cannot hire Americans to do the kind of job that I'm talking about. And The second reason is because the individuals who register as guest workers, they don't get to vote, they are not American citizens, and they don't get the rights and privileges of American citizens. So that's key. But the other thing that I want to bring up is I mentioned something earlier, I think it was just sort of glossed over. I talked about the success in Yuma County. I mean, incredible success. And the Department of Justice said, no, we don't want to do that. That's too successful. We don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. All we have to do is look at things that work. All we have to do is use a little common sense.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I want to talk about the issue of birthright citizenship, which has emerged since the first debate as a major issue in this campaign. Mr. Trump, you say that babies born in the United States to undocumented immigrants should not any longer get automatic American citizenship. Ms. Fiorina says that you are pandering on this issue and acting like the politicians that you rail against. What's your message to Ms. Fiorina on birthright citizenship?
Well, first of all, the 14th Amendment says very, very clearly to a lot of great legal scholars, not television scholars, but legal scholars, that it is wrong. It can be corrected with an act of Congress, probably doesn't even need that. A woman gets pregnant. She's 9 months. She walks across the border. She has the baby in the United States, and we take care of the baby for 85 years. I don't think so. And by the way, Mexico and almost every other country anywhere in the world doesn't have that. We're the only ones dumb enough, stupid enough to have it. And people, and by the way, this is not just with respect to Mexico. They're coming from Asia to have babies here, and all of a sudden we have to take care of the babies for the life of the baby. The 14th Amendment, it reads properly. You can go, and it's probably going to have to go through a process of court, probably ends up at the Supreme Court, but there are a lot of great legal scholars that say that is not correct. And in my opinion, it makes absolutely we're the only one of the only countries. We're going to take care of those babies for 70, 75, 80, 90 years? I don't think so.
Ms. Fiorina, the vast majority of countries do not have birthright citizenship. Donald Trump is right about that. Why is it pandering when he says this?
First, let me say we have just spent a good bit of time discussing as Republicans how to solve this problem. I would ask your audience at home to ask a very basic question. Why have Democrats not solved this problem? President Obama campaigned in 2007 and 2008 on solving the immigration problem. He entered Washington with majorities in the House and the Senate. He could have chosen to do anything to solve this problem. Instead, he chose to do nothing. Why? Because the Democrats don't want this issue solved. They want it to be an issue that they can use. As to birthright citizenship, the truth is you can't just wave your hands and say the 14th Amendment is going to go away. It will take an extremely arduous vote in Congress, followed by 2/3 of the states, and if that doesn't work to amend the Constitution, then it is a long, arduous process in court. And meanwhile, what will continue to go on is what has gone on for 25 years. With all due respect, Mr. Trump, we have been talking about illegal immigration for 25 years. San Francisco has been a sanctuary city since 1989. There are 300 of them. And meanwhile, what has happened? Nothing. The border remains insecure. The legal immigration system remains broken. Look, we know what it takes to secure a border. We've heard a lot of great ideas here. Money, manpower, technology, mostly apparently leadership, the kind of leadership that understands how to get results.
Thank you, Ms. Fiorina. Mr. Trump, I want to give you a chance.
By the way, with Carly on the fact that the Democrats do not want to solve this problem for the obvious reasons, but they do not. But I believe that a reading of the 14th Amendment allows you to have an interpretation where this is not legal and where it can't be done. I've seen both sides, but some of the greatest scholars agree with me without having to go through Congress. If you do go through Congress, you can absolutely solve it.
Thank you, Mr. Trump.
You would stipulate, Mr. Trump, that not everyone agrees with you.
That's true. Sure.
Senator Paul, I want to bring you in. Where do you stand on the issue of birthright citizenship?
Well, I hate to say it, but Donald Trump has a bit of a point here. The case that was decided around 1900 was people who had a green card, were here legally, and they said that their children were citizens. There's never been a direct Supreme Court case on people who are here illegally, whether or not their kids are citizens. So it hasn't really been completely adjudicated. The 14th Amendment says that those who are here and under the jurisdiction The original author of the 14th Amendment said on the Senate floor that this was applying to slaves and did not specifically apply to others.
All right, Senator Paul, thank you so much. Let's turn to a new topic. We've received a lot of questions on social media about the economy and about jobs. We have two CEOs on stage right now. Ms. Fiorina, you were CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Donald Trump says you, quote, ran HP into the ground. You laid off tens of thousands of people. You got viciously fired. For voters looking to somebody with private sector experience to create American jobs, why should they pick you and not Donald Trump?
I led Hewlett-Packard through a very difficult time, the worst technology recession in 25 years. The NASDAQ stock index fell 80%. It took 15 years for the stock index to recover. We had very strong competitors who literally went out of business and lost all of their jobs in the process. Despite those difficult times, we doubled the size of the company. We quadrupled its top-line growth rate. We quadrupled its cash flow. We tripled its rate of innovation. Yes, we had to make tough choices. And in doing so, we saved 80,000 jobs, went on to grow to 160,000 jobs, and now Hewlett-Packard is almost 300,000 jobs. We went from lagging behind to leading in every product category and every market segment. We must lead in this nation again, and some tough calls are going to be required. But as for the firing, I have been very honest about this from the day it happened. When you challenge the status quo, you make enemies. I made a few. Steve Jobs told me that when he called me the day I was fired to say, hey, been there, done that twice. It's also true that the man that led my firing, Tom Perkins, just took out a full-page ad in the New York Times to say he was wrong, I was right, I was a terrific CEO, the board was dysfunctional, and he thinks I will make a magnificent president of the United States.
Well, Mr. Trump, why would you be better at creating jobs than Carly Fiorina?
Well, let me just explain. The head of the Yale Business School, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, wrote a paper recently, one of the worst tenures for a CEO that he has ever seen, ranked one of the top 20 in the history of business. The company is a disaster and continues to be a disaster. They still haven't recovered. In fact, today on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, they fired another 25 or 30,000 people, saying we still haven't recovered from the catastrophe. When Carly says the revenues went up, that's because she bought Compaq. It was a terrible deal, and it really led to the destruction of the company. Now, one other company before that was Lucent. Carly was at Lucent before that. And Lucent turned out to be a catastrophe also. So I only say this. She can't run any of my companies. That I can tell you.
Ms. Fiorina, I want to give you a chance to respond.
Jeffrey Sonnenfeld is a well-known Clintonite and honestly had it out for me from the moment that I arrived at Hewlett-Packard. But honestly, Mr. Trump, I find it quite rich that you would talk about this. You know, there are a lot of us Americans who believe that we are going to have trouble someday paying back the interest on our debt because politicians have run up mountains of debt using other people's money. That is, in fact, precisely the way you ran your casinos. You ran up mountains of debt as well as losses using other people's money, and you were forced to file for bankruptcy not once,
I never filed
not
for
twice, 4 times, a record 4 times. Why should we trust you to manage the finances of this nation any differently than you manage the finances of your casinos?
Mr. Trump, I've made over $10 billion. I had a casino company. Caesars just filed for bankruptcy. Chris will tell you, it's not Chris's fault either. But almost everybody in Atlantic City is either in trouble or filed for maybe I'll blame Chris.
Well,
but Atlantic City is a disaster. Wait a minute, Carly. Wait, I'll let you speak. Atlantic City is a disaster, and I did great in Atlantic City. I knew when to get out. My timing was great, and I got a lot of credit for it. Many of the great business people that you know, and Carl Icahn's going to work with me on making great deals for this country, but whether it's Carl or so many others that we read about all the time, they have used the laws of the land, which are the best.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Governor Christie's name has been invoked. I'd like to give him the 30-second opportunity.
Listen, while I'm as entertained as anyone by this personal back and forth about the history of Donald and Carly's career, for the 55-year-old construction worker out in that audience tonight who doesn't have a job, who can't fund his child's education, I got to tell you the truth. They could care less about your careers. They care about theirs. Let's start talking about that on this stage and stop playing the games. John, I'm not done yet, John.
A track record of leadership is not a game. It is the issue in this election.
Carly, listen. You can interrupt everybody else on the stage. You can't interrupt me. Okay? The fact is, that we don't want to hear about your careers. Back and forth and volleying back and forth about who did well and who did poorly. You're both successful people. Congratulations. You know who's not successful? The middle class in this country who's getting plowed over by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Let's start talking about those issues tonight and stop this childish back and forth between the two of you.
Ms. Fiorina, I want to give you... Governor Kasich, I'm coming to you next, but Ms. Fiorina's name was mentioned, and I have to give her the opportunity to respond if she wants it.
Well, I thought we had been hearing quite a bit about Governor Christie's record as governor. Actually, I think track records are very important. I completely agree that what's at stake here is the future of this nation and the future of every American. But I do think that a track record of leadership is vital, because in the end, this election is about leadership. And let's talk about what leadership is. It's not about braggadocio. It is about challenging the status quo, solving problems, producing results, and the highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others.
Thank you.
Problems have festered in Washington for too long, and the potential of this nation is being crushed.
Thank you, Ms. Fiorina. Governor Kasich, I want to come to you. I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you. Let me ask the question. You can use it the time however you want.
Okay, Jay.
Donald Trump says that the hedge fund guys are getting away with murder by paying a lower tax rate. He wants to raise the taxes of hedge fund managers, as does Governor Bush. Do you agree?
Now, I don't at this point in terms of changing the incentives for investment and risk-taking, but let's just stop for a second. There's one person on this stage that does have a record. I'm the only person on the stage and one of the few people in this country that led the effort as the chief architect of the last time we balanced the federal budget. We also cut taxes. And when I left Washington in 2000, we had a $5 trillion surplus and the economy was booming. I'd spent 10 years of my life to get us to that point. Went out in the private sector. It was a great experience, and went into Ohio and took an $8 billion hole and turned it into a $2 billion surplus. We've had the largest amount of tax cuts of any sitting governor. We've grown well over 300,000 jobs. You see, I've done it in both places. I'm the only one here that's done it in both places. It took a lot to get us to a balanced budget. It was legitimate, it was real, and we negotiated it. A lot of what we're talking about here tonight is, I'm going to take this position and that position. You know what? At the end of the day, America's got to work. We got to figure out how we come together to deal with this, with our fiscal problems, because when we deal with that, we create a stronger economy for everybody. People have a chance to rise. So, you know, when we think about how we make a choice, it's the person that lands that plane. It's not somebody that talks about it. It's about the person who's done it. And I've done it in both places. And I did it, including people in the other party, and that's how we were successful, and that's how I will be president, using that experience to drive this country forward.
Governor Huckabee, I want to bring you in on the question of hedge fund managers and taxing them. You have said that you are bothered by the fact that hedge fund managers pay such a low tax rate and make 2,500 times what people who work for them make. Do you agree with what Donald Trump and Governor Bush have proposed, raising their tax rates?
I have a different idea. I think we ought to get rid of all the taxes on people who produce. Why should we penalize productivity? And it's why I'm an unabashed supporter of the fair tax, which would be a tax on our consumption rather than a tax on our productivity. In other words, you're not going to tax anybody for what they earn, whether it's a worker who's working by the hour or whether it's a hedge fund manager. If they can produce something and bring capital and labor to create jobs, we need some jobs. And I think the fair tax makes more sense. Now, Jake, I've been listening to everybody on the stage, and there's a lot of back and forth about I'm the only one who's done this, the only one who's done that. I've done great things. We've all done great things or we wouldn't be on this stage. But it occurs to me as we're sitting here in the Reagan Library that most of us would like to pay tribute to a guy who, when he got elected, didn't get elected telling everybody how great he was. He got elected telling everybody how great the American people were, and he empowered them to live their dreams, which is what I'd love to see us do by no longer penalizing the people who are out there working, because they're taking a gut punch right now.
Thank you, Governor. Dr. Carson, you support scrapping the entire tax code and replacing it with a flat tax based on the principle of tithing from the Bible. If you make $10 billion, you pay $1 billion in taxes. If you make $10, you pay $1 in taxes. Donald Trump believes in progressive taxation. He says it's not right that rich people pay the same as the poor. tell Donald Trump why his ideas on taxes are wrong.
It's all about America. You know, the people who say the guy who paid $1 billion because he had 10, he's still got $9 billion left. That's not fair. We need to take more of his money. That's called socialism. That doesn't work so well. What made America into a great nation was the fact that we said, that guy just put in $1 billion. Let's create an environment that's even more conducive to his success so that next year he can put in $2 billion. And that's the kind of thing that helps us to grow. We can't grow by continuing to take a piece of pie and dividing it and redistributing it. But I'm also looking at what Governor Huckabee talked about.
You don't want me operating on you, I assure you that.
The fair tax. Looking at both of them, and we're evaluating them both, and I'm talking to the American people, because one of the things we must recognize is that this country is of, for, and by the people. And it's really time that the government get out of the way and let the people be the ones who decide how they want to run their country.
Mr. Trump, what do you think of the flat? Yes, what do you think of the flat tax? Do you think it's fair?
Well, I think the thing about the flat tax, I know it very well, that I don't like is if you make $200 million a year, you pay 10%, you're paying very little relatively to somebody that's making $50,000 a year and has to hire H&R Block to do the rest because it's so complicated. One thing I'll say to Ben is that we've had a graduated tax system for many years, so it's not a socialistic thing. What I'd like to do is, and I'll be putting in the plan in about 2 weeks, and I think people are going to like it, it's a major reduction in taxes. It's a major reduction for the middle class. The hedge fund guys won't like me as much as they like me right now. I know them all, but they'll pay more. I know people that are making a tremendous amount of money and paying virtually no tax, and I think it's unfair.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Senator Paul.
I'm glad we're having a discussion about taxes because everybody laments that we lose jobs overseas. Well, yeah, our companies and our jobs are being chased overseas by a 70,000-page tax code. So that's why I've chosen to get rid of the whole thing and have one single rate, 14.5% for everybody, business and for corporate income and personal income. But we also get rid of the payroll tax, so the working class would get a tax break as well. So I think a flat tax, eliminating the tax code, getting rid of all the loopholes is the way to go, and it's the way we get America going again.
Governor Walker, I want to go to you. Dr. Carson wants to raise the federal minimum wage. You have called it a lame idea. Why is raising the federal minimum wage lame?
I said the best way to help people see their wages go up is to get them the education, the skills they need to take on careers that pay far more than minimum wage. And it's why we talk about it's all about jobs. You want to help people actually get jobs. It's why on that last question we're trying to jump in on taxes. To me, it's not just about taxes, cutting taxes. I've done it as much as anybody. I've cut income taxes. I've cut property taxes. Property taxes are lower today in my state than they were before we took office. The real issue is about jobs. Ronald Reagan, our plan is based on the Ronald Reagan tax cuts of 1986. That brought about one of the longest sustained periods of economic growth in American history. All the things we should be talking about tonight are about how do we create jobs, helping people get the skills and the education qualifications they need to succeed. That's the way you help people create jobs. It's part of our larger plan to reform the tax code, to cut taxes, to put in place an education system that gives people the skills and education that they need, to put in place an all-of-the-above energy policy. But you start on day one with repealing Obamacare. I'm the only one on the stage who's actually got a plan, introduced an actual plan to repeal Obamacare on day one. I'll send a bill up to Congress and to make sure they actually enact it. I'm going to sign an order that makes the Congress live by the same rules as everybody else.
Thank you, Governor.
That will ensure they repeal
Dr. Carson, Governor Walker didn't really answer the question, but I'll let you respond. He called raising the federal minimum wage lame. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, let me say what I actually said about raising the minimum wage. I was asked, should it be raised? I said, probably or possibly. But what I added, which I think is the most important thing, is I said we need to get both sides of this issue to sit down and talk about it, negotiate a reasonable minimum wage, and index that so that we never have to have this conversation again in the history of America. I think we also have to have two minimum wages, a starter and a sustaining, because how are young people ever going to get a job if you have such a high minimum wage that it makes it impractical to hire them?
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I want to now turn to Hugh. I want to turn to Hugh.
That issue, because you said I didn't answer, and I did. I said, to me, I think the real focus shouldn't be, Hillary Clinton talks about the minimum wage. That's her answer to grow the economy. The answer is to get people the skills and the education so they make far more than minimum wage. I don't want to argue about how low things are going to be. I want to talk about how do we lift everyone up in America. That's what Reagan talked about. It wasn't how bad things were. It was how to make it better for everyone. That's what we've done in Wisconsin. That's exactly what we do.
Let me bring in our partner from Salem Radio Network, Hugh Hewitt.
I'd like to talk about winning, because I think all of you are more qualified than former Secretary of State Clinton, and as were the people in the first debate. But there are different styles. And Carly Fiorina, Governor Kasich, you are conveniently located next to each other, and you have different styles. Governor Kasich, you've been on my show a lot. You refuse to attack Hillary Clinton. You just don't want to go there. You want to do the Up With People, Go Ohio campaign, and I like that. Carly Fiorina, I don't have to bring up the Secretary of State. You bring her up sua sponte. Which one of you is wrong? Governor Kasich?
Well, look, people still have to get to know me, so I want to spend my time talking about my experience, reforming welfare, balancing budgets, cutting taxes, providing economic growth when I was in Washington, turning Ohio around, $8 billion in the hole, $2 billion surplus, up over 300,000 jobs, big tax cuts, strengthening our credit. All those things matter. But you know, I as a young man, in my first election in 1978, I defeated an incumbent Democrat. I defeated an incumbent Democrat in 1982, running on the Reagan program. I was the only Republican in America to defeat an incumbent Democrat that year. And then when I won for election to governor, I was the first Republican to defeat an incumbent in 36 years, and the first person to have never run statewide, out of politics for 10 years, to beat an incumbent. That hadn't happened for 96 years. So we'll get to the point where we'll talk about Hillary Clinton or whoever the nominee is record. But right now, I want to give people a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, a sense of unity, a sense that we can do it. So, you know, with you at the end of the day, I'm going to continue to talk about my record because do you ever notice when people run for office, they run for president, they make a lot of promises, they don't keep them. I don't intend to do that, and I'm going to be out there pushing it out. Don't worry about me and Hillary. That'll all work out. And I'm from Ohio. She will not beat me there. I can promise you that.
Carly Fiorina, your style.
You see, Governor Christie, people spend a lot of time talking about their track records, and Mr. Trump and I have every right to do the same. And Mrs. Clinton is going to have to defend her track record of lying about Benghazi, of lying about her emails, about lying about her servers. She does not have a track record of accomplishment. Like Mrs. Clinton, I too have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles around the globe. But unlike Mrs. Clinton, I know that flying is an activity. It is not an accomplishment. Mrs. Clinton, if you want to stump a Democrat, ask them to name an accomplishment of Mrs. Clinton's.
Thank you, Ms. Fiorina. Governor Christie, your name was mentioned. I want to give you a chance to respond.
Listen, you know, Hugh, it's an important point. And the question is, who's going to prosecute Hillary Clinton? The Obama White House seems to have no interest. The Justice Department seems to have no interest. I think it's time to put a former federal prosecutor on the same stage with Hillary Clinton, and I will prosecute her during those debates on that stage for the record that we're talking about here. The fact that she had a private email server in her basement using national security secrets running through it could have been hacked by the Russians, the Chinese, or two 18-year-olds on a toot wanting to have some fun. No one's answering that question from the Hillary Clinton campaign. You know why? Because she knows she's wrong, and she cannot look in the mirror at herself, and she cannot tell the American people the truth.
Thank you, Governor Christie. There is a whole lot more coming up ahead. A world of trouble. The challenges that one of these candidates may face in the Oval Office and how he or she will handle it. Stay with us.